Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the Large Format Photography Podcast. My name is Simon Forster and I'm joined by my co-host Andrew Bartram and our guest Brendan Barry. Hello Andrew.
Hello Simon.
And hello Brendan.
Hello.
Hello Brendan. Right, first of all, I just want to say thank you to Jeff Perry for being our guest 2 weeks ago. Now I say 2 weeks ago. It's not really, because we only actually recorded that show about 5 days ago. So, as usual with these things, when we do things out of sync, we tend to get. I say we tend to get a bit confused. I tend to get a bit confused. So there you go. So bear with me if I do come across a little bit senile this week, because that tends to be what happens. So yes, thank you, Jeff, for being out. I noticed there was no support there, was there? So thank you, Jeff, for being our guest for the last episode. It was a great chat there. It was pretty fascinating to learn the things that you go through to modify your cameras and such, and come up with those things like those the reels you got for putting 5x4 sheet film into Patterson tanks. It was absolutely fascinating. Okay, so as usual, we're just going to do a bit of a catch up, and seeing that it wasn't actually that long we were talking about our last catch up, I guess this section might be a little bit shorter than usual. So I'm going to head over to Andrew in Cambridgeshire, who's not feeling very well. So please feel sorry for Andrew. And what have you been up to?
Well, I put some more film through my Horizon panoramic camera. I haven't developed it yet, so we'll see how that goes. I put a roll of Eastman 5222 XX film through there. And more excitingly, I'm just getting ready to relocate my DeVere 504 enlarger into the boot of my Volvo, or into the back of the Volvo, and take it down to Brighton. I think it's just wonderful that enlargers, well, this one anyway, you can still take it to the manufacturer, and they've still got a service team who can overhaul it and lubricate it and clean it and get all the shit out of it. Because this thing is 40 years old, excuse my swearing. This thing is 40 years old, and it's sat in Steve Segersby's garage for some years, gathering dust. So I'm really excited to leave it in the hands of the manufacturers, and then it'll be good to go for another 40 years and probably see me out. So that's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering now. Is there a bit of a pattern forming here? I mean,
I don't know,
did your enlarger used to belong to Stephen Segersby?
It did, yeah. I bought it off him. Unlike you're getting yours donated, yeah. I had to part with proper cash for it. But it was £300, and it came with a 150mm lens, which is a sort of standard normal lens for 5x4 film, and I thought that was pretty good. I bought that. He did send it to me. It's got an extractor fan on it to take away the blow. It sucks air out, so it draws. I guess it's meant to draw the heat away from the bulb. Mm-hmm. And he sold it to me, and the fan wasn't working. So I phoned up John Boyce, who's the man at Odyssey DeVere down in Brighton, and he said, "Oh yeah, we keep fans for those. It comes with like 2 bare wires. You'll have to take the old one out and solder the new one in." So I did that and just made sure it was sucking and not blowing, as they say, and it was all good. I didn't get a discount though. I think he claimed it was working when he sold it to me, but I think you've got to watch out for that. Stephen Segersby's a bit of a Dell boy.
Well, it looks. I've had some dive since the last time we talked about it. I now have dimensions of this behemoth of a 7x5 enlarger, cold cathode condensing enlarger, or something on those lines. Perhaps Barry can explain that a little bit to us at some point. But
or Brendan.
Oh, I'm sorry, Brendan.
That's all right. No, I'm used to it.
Well, it's the people who have names that have got 2 first names. It's all kind of a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, they get them mixed up all the time. It's fine.
I think yeah.
You can refer to me as Barry or Brendan. It's fine.
Well, the thing is,
what was that about senility?
Yeah, well, this is a nightmare for me, because we had Jeff Perry last week. So yeah, there's too many RRY people in the one after the other that I'm struggling to cope with that now. So I'm completely lost now.
But the other thing, well, first of all, will that big enlarger fit in your darkroom in Stoke-on-Trent?
Well, the 6 Towns darkroom, as we have it, has 3 booths, and they're about 600 wide. The smallest one's about 600 wide, and then we've got 2 others that, well, there's one that's 600 wide again, but it goes back. The further it goes back, it widens out, because it goes into a corner, and then we have another one that is certainly wide enough for this thing, but it's 80 centimeters wide, this enlarger. But I'm reckoning that we can potentially like squeeze it somehow, lift it over something or through something, or put it in at an angle and get it into this middle bay where it goes wider as it goes deeper. So that's the hope. If not, we'll put it into the wider bay, but that's got a shelf above it, which that's going to cause us a few problems, because we'd have to remove the shelf that sits above it. So one way or another, we will get it in. It's as simple as that.
Brendan, I don't know if you're aware, but Simon's starting a bit of a. Simon and others are starting a bit of a film darkroom session at the 6 Towns. Is it called the 6 Towns Darkroom?
Well, it's part of the 6 Towns Photographic Club is what the space is, and every Tuesday night we take it over.
So you're gradually growing in numbers, aren't you? But I think you can probably pick up some tips from this week's guest about how to, get the masses in. Because one day you need like an open day, don't you? Really, and what better guest to learn from than one who engages with folks in quite the way that Brendan does?
Well, you'll need to put lots of gaffer tape and cardboard to use. That's the way I tend to sort of attract people into what I do. It's definitely draws a crowd sometimes. But I'm sure I might be able to offer some tips.
Yeah. Oh, well, there was that. I did mention earlier, and I'm putting you on the spot because I don't know if you got any specific knowledge of this, but the enlarger that is coming to us it's one of the older style enlargers. So it's the cold cathode enlargers. Do you have any specific knowledge of using that type of enlarger?
I don't know. I do have a shipping container full of them, but I'm yet to sort of put them to use. I cleared out a darkroom at a university nearby recently. They had 2 analog black and white darkrooms, a wet room and a dry room, and they were combining them into one. And I heard that they were going to throw. I think I got 9 De Beer 203s and 4 504s that they were just going to throw in a skip. So I've got them in one of my 3 shipping containers that's full of enlarged, but I'm yet to kind of piece them together. I'm trying to set up a kind of community darkroom hub myself here in Exeter at the moment, actually. And so if you ask me that in a month or 2, then I might have a better answer. But it's been a while since I've worked actually in a proper darkroom. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say I'm particularly looking forward to actually using one of these older style enlargers, because I think it's at the end of the day that's what people used to use, and they were producing beautiful photographs, in the 40s or whatever. I'm not sure when the newer style came out, so it's quite appealing to me that it is actually an old way of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the thing with darkrooms, is that like I always find that you just get some kit. If it works and you can get something out of it, get a print out of it, whatever, then it's just kind of just finding the parts, putting it all together, and as soon as you kind of I'm a big fan of just sort of trial by error and making stuff up as you go along a little bit. So if the light turns on and it focuses, then it should be fun.
I think the only thing that you may have trouble with the cold cathode, maybe the light sources are more difficult to get hold of. When I did a bit of searching around online, it talked about them being expensive, but when I'm down at De Vere's tomorrow, Odyssey De Vere, I shall ask John Boyce, particularly, and if you send me a picture before then, Simon,
will do.
I'll see what hints and tips he's got for you.
Excellent. No, I shall do that.
Just to finish off talking about moving my De Vere enlarger into the car, the first thing I had to do was move my Beard 16 by 20 enlarging easel, because it was a bit grubby, so I brought it into the kitchen and cleaned it up. And I was thinking about the largest prints I'd ever made, and of course I was thinking of having watched Brendan's videos and his use of rolls of paper from Ilford, I realised I'd actually never made a print bigger than 12 by 16, and I think it's partly sort of financial, but camera clubs and things, 16 by 20 used to be a standard size, but I can certainly make bigger prints, and you can turn enlargers on their sides, can't you, and back to front and project onto the floor or onto the walls and things. But I never really made big ones. Certainly never played around with rolls of paper like you do, Brendan.
Yeah, it's when you get that big, obviously, there's so many different kind of issues and challenges and stuff you have to face. But to be honest, similarly when in the darkroom, I don't think I've ever made a print bigger than 16 by 20 with a enlargement from a negative. But obviously the stuff that I'm doing at the moment is creating paper negatives. So trying to create something that big in a darkroom is as you say, you can turn it on its side and project it on the wall. I remember doing that at college years and years ago, but it brings up a whole load of challenges in itself that way.
It does. You see, there's some videos online, aren't there, with Ansel Adams projecting onto the wall to make super big prints. But I think he's using a sort of enlarger on a railway line. That's what it looks like anyway. Some huge sort of projector style enlarger, which projects an enormous image on the wall, and he's got big sheets of paper taped to it.
Yeah, I've seen some of them, and he's like, when he's dodging and burning, he's kind of standing in the way of the light.
I know. It's like a performance art, isn't it? As well?
It's like he's conducting an orchestra or something. Well, he always said that, didn't he? He said that
he did.
The negative is the score and the print is the performance.
He did, yes.
So, other than your planned trip down to Brighton, anything else going on in your world?
Yeah, but not photography related.
Okay. Well, in that case, let's go on to what I've been up to, which is not strictly large format, but it's all connected. Because the only thing of note that I've actually done since our last recording was last night at the 6 Times Darkroom, where I made my very first enlargement.
I saw that, and it looked great. It was your son, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, it is, and it was. It was shot on 35mm using a Leica M2 and a friend's lens, and using ancient, certainly very old Pan 100 film. I think it expired around about 1994. I think.
Have you not? You're getting great results, but come on, you need to support Ilford a bit and buy some new stuff. You're such a tightwad, aren't you? Come on, put your money in your pocket.
I was given a load of old film by Eric Casluce in Belgium, and this was actually one of the roles that he gave me. And I feel, if I've got the film, I should use it. And I think.
He's the guy who was on one of your shows recently, wasn't he? And the one I listened to recently, I don't know how old it was, but does he live in the middle of he sort of walks outside his house and suddenly comes against all kinds of weird... Yeah, that's it. There Be Dragons episode.
Yeah, he's a Dutchman, and he lives in Mons. I think it's southern Belgium, I think, Mons. But every time he does loads of street photography, and every time he just walks out the house, there's just people wearing incredible costumes. It just seems to be normal, and it goes around. It doesn't seem to matter what time of year it is, what time of day.
Belgium for you, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a remarkable place, and is a really great street photographer and documentarian photographer. But he's a big fan of expired film, and he sent me a load because the reason why he sent it to me was because I was being a little bit too picky about taking photographs. So I was thinking, this thing about making your photograph being worthy and all this kind of stuff, because every time I press the button, it costs me money and so on. And despite sounding like I'm reasonably well off with the amount of lenses and things I have at my disposal, that's because it's my business rather than my own personal stuff, and I'm not exactly swimming in money to be able to spend money on film. So he sent that to me with the view that just go out there and shoot photos and don't worry about it, because it doesn't cost much to develop black and white, and they're almost all black and white. And that was exactly what I did. And with one of the rolls he sent me, I did a bokeh panorama of a model car, a full-size model car in Regent's Park. So I took like about 27 photographs of the same thing, but in slightly different positions, and put them together. The kind of thing that I might do digitally. And I thought, no, I'm gonna do this on film, because if I don't, it'll take me another year to finish this roll off, like the last roll did. And it was a really interesting exercise, and the what it produced was interesting in itself, and it was worthy. In fact, I scanned everything and put it into Photoshop and put everything together. And there's a section before everything is reassembled perfectly. You see the overlays of each individual shot, and they're all distorted, and it's quite an odd effect. It's as if like you've put it's a bit like a montage of the same subject, but it's also distorted at the same time.
Yeah, I heard you talking about it, and I didn't, because I was driving. So I didn't look at the image, but I think I've seen it on a post somewhere. Yeah, but it was one of those things I made a mental note of to ask you sometime, not on this show, just to explain how you did it. But yeah. If it involves too much Photoshop, I'm really not that interested. So
yeah, it's not actually a difficult thing, but as you say, it's probably not for this conversation.
No. But anyway, you made your first.
Was good.
You made your first print.
Yes. Back onto this. So that was on the same day, and using this old film and even older Jessup's Grade 3 paper. Because we've got quite a bit of old paper at our darkroom, with the view that, well, let's use up the old stuff before we start buying new stuff, and especially when you've got people like myself who are very inexperienced in the darkroom. I don't mind, playing around, trying stuff, and potentially wasting paper, because it's not really wasting paper if you're learning, is it? And I don't mind doing that if this stuff is effectively without cost.
The bin should always be full. Mine certainly is.
Yeah, but graded paper. I mean, that's some people have had a go at me. The fact I'm learning on graded paper instead of learning on multigrade. I'm taking the view. Well, it's there, and it's a little bit like when you're teaching somebody. If you're learning photography, people say, well, go out and get yourself a film camera and get a K1000 is the thing that everybody seems to say, but there's something in that, isn't there, about going back to the absolute basics to learn photography. And to some degree, I'm sort of thinking about using graded paper is a bit like going back to basics there. Now, I was going to say Brendan is an educator. And I'm just wondering if you're sitting back and listening to me in absolute horror at the moment, Brendan.
No, not in the slightest. I think you're right. It's if you can, it's like driving. If you're learning to drive a car, yes, you can learn to drive on an automatic, but you're never going to be able to control the car, and it's not kind of have as much kind of enjoyment of the ride potentially then. If you're just driving along in automatic, no offense to people that drive automatic cars, of course, but if you have a more innate and deeper and richer understanding of the technology that you're using, whether that be the camera or the paper, the enlarger, the negatives, inevitably it's going to lead you to being able to create more interesting things potentially. Yeah.
Well, and this is it's always a good evening at our darkroom. We've got 7 members, and of varying degrees of ability or speciality in different areas. And last night was not just interesting and fulfilling for me, actually managing to produce a print that I was happy with. But one of our members and hopefully listening to the show is Paul Bullock. Who came along, and he'd just been on a course with one of the Ilford Master darkroom people, not Andrew Sanderson. There's a chap that lives in Carlisle, I think, or in the Lake District. Andrew, does that ring any bells? So I can't remember his name now.
If you said his name, I'd probably know him. But...
Yeah, I'm almost certain. I think there's only a couple of people in the country that of that kind of level, I believe, and hopefully I'm not upsetting a huge amount of people now. I haven't just said that, but anyway, so scratch that. But he's a very good darkroom man, and a true expert. And Paul spent a couple of days with him, and I think actually this was split over a period of time actually. But Paul brought in some of his photos, whether it be from medium format and at least one large format enlargement that he'd done, and it was really interesting just to see these photographs. But secondly, the processes that we used, including is it split toning, where you get a level and then you set your enlarger to 5 and to 0, and you
no.
stuff.
No, you're getting two things muddled up. You're going to confuse our audience now. So there's split grade printing and split toning. Split toning is something I play around with sometimes, and you can use something like selenium toner, which affects the blacks and the shadows first, and then you can use a light bleach, and the bleach it'll affect the highlights and the shadows, but you'll notice it first in the highlights. So you can partially bleach back a print and then wash it, and then and tone it in a let's call it a sepia toner, but it's a couple of chemicals that you mix together. So your highlights then pick up a kind of creamy color. Your shadows are largely unaffected because you haven't let the bleach go far enough. And then you dunk it in selenium toner and you get a very intensive black shadows with these creamy highlights. That would be a controlled split tone.
Well, it wasn't that one.
No.
It was the other.
Well, I know. So you're talking about split grade printing, where Andrew Sanderson's done quite a bit of work on this, and others have as well. But it's basically where you're printing combining a grade 0 or grade 1 with a grade 5, and you do separate tests first. You do grade 0 probably first to look at highlight density. So you do a series of steps on the print to see when you're getting a highlight density that you're happy with. Then you do a print at that time, and then you overlay that with a series of grade 5 steps to look at the shadow areas and see the shadow that you're happy with, and then you combine the two into a final print.
Yeah. Well,
it sounds like you're eating a bit of cheese or something there. What was that?
Or making a camera out of cheese, but there's only one of us that's likely to do that, and it's not me.
Moldy cheese.
Yeah. Right. I think we've talked enough about a few things there. Plus, I still haven't quite got my head around what you've just spoken about. So we'll go into more detail.
Well, you did. You were confusing our podcast audience by talking about split grade toning or something. I don't know what on earth you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's enough of my confusion this week. Let's head over to a large room where Brendan is. We've got a mental image of what Brendan's doing at the moment, because we think he's actually in the corner of a very large room in an educational institution, hidden behind a curtain. Would that be about right, Brendan?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I've made myself a little den in the corner of this big echoey room with a curtain that's sort of to try and dampen the sound a little bit, so you only hear what I say once and not 20 times as it reverberates around the room.
Well, thank you for making those extra preparations there and being resourceful. But we know you're a resourceful person. So what have you been up to lately, Brendan?
What have I been up to? Oh God, all sorts really. I've been so I teach part time at Exeter College, next to School of Art, here in Devon, where I live, and yeah, a mixture of things. Making a few cameras. It was Halloween recently, so I couldn't resist the temptation of making a camera out of a pumpkin. Mm-hmm. I recently had to throw away a giant block of cheese because I'd left it in I'd built a 5x4-inch camera out of a block of cheese, and then kind of forgot about it, kind of just put it out of my mind because I just couldn't be bothered to deal with it. Left it in my shipping container, or one of my shipping containers. It's my workshop for about 3 weeks. So when I came back, that was in a bit of a stinky state. And yeah, working on a few projects coming up and just trying to keep busy, really. I've got a 1-year-old daughter at home as well, so it's just trying to make the most of the time that I get where I'm awake, basically.
I'm just going to say, I'm just on your website at the moment, and because I've seen your cheese camera, and but your website doesn't seem to have it. So I think I've seen your cheese camera on Instagram, no doubt.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But it's just really hard to keep up with the kind of the sheer number of things that you've actually converted into a camera?
Yeah, well, I mean, the trick is the secret. It's not even a secret, really, but it's quite easy, really. I mean, there's two ways that I kind of go about making cameras, and one is sort of building a camera from scratch, I suppose, and making it out of different materials. So I've made cameras out of Lego. Shout out to American photographer Cary Norton, actually, who kind of designed the first Lego camera that I came across, and I kind of used his design and developed it a bit to shoot Polaroid. Or I've made cameras out of plywood and lots of cardboard, and then the sort of other cameras that are somewhere between a kind of conversion, which are out of objects or strange things like loaves of bread and pineapples and watermelons and things like that. I made a digital camera not so long ago, using an old overhead projector, kind of gutted, and then I built some bellows for it, and then just used a flatbed scanner which effectively scans the light that's being projected onto the glass. And it's the slowest and poorest quality, lowest resolution digital camera that you could possibly get, but it works. So there's those kind of fun, playful cameras that predominantly, mixture of medium format, 35mm, mostly large format. It's a bit easier to work with a large format because you can use a ground glass, so you don't have to kind of use mirrors and things like that, which obviously make things a lot more complicated. And they're just, that's kind of for fun. It's it can usually takes about a day to sort of put one together, maybe a little bit of preparation, gathering parts and things like that. And then the other side of things, a bit that I probably enjoy more, I think I'd say, is sort of transforming spaces into cameras. And the great thing about that is obviously you've got a big room, whether it's a caravan or a shipping container or some kind of shed or
skyscraper
or a skyscraper, is that you can bring other people inside and kind of and that then becomes a really exciting space to kind of teach the mechanics of photography, but also sort of facilitate learning, but creativity and image making as well.
Right. Well, I think this is probably a good time to introduce you properly, because I think people by now, if they haven't heard about you before, they'd be thinking, what? Pineapple cameras? I'm looking at one out of butternut squash, and there's one here with a looks like some kind of cyborg, where it's made out of a mannequin, female mannequin with this lens sticking out of one eye, and so on. So, Brendan, you're I've already mentioned there, you're an educator there, and you're a photographer, and you do weird and wonderful things. Perhaps you could give us a little bit of an idea, a little bit about your background and how on earth you got to the point where you were doing these really odd things.
Well, that's obviously quite a long story, so I'll cut that as short as I can, and the significant bits. I mean, I've always sort of had an interest and passion for photography, like right from when I was a kid, and that led me through school and college. I went to university, studied photography, and then worked as a photographer for kind of freelance and for various sort of agencies, mostly kind of commercial stuff, for a number of years after I left uni, and I went back and restudied and did a master's in photography, and it was around that time when I kind of established a kind of working practice, if you like, and in those days, this is maybe sort of eight years ago, I suppose, I was very much the kind of large format photographer. I spent a lot of time kind of traveling around America, in the kind of tradition of Walker Evans and Alex Soth and Joel Sternfeld and Stephen Shaw and later Alex Soth, these kind of man on side of the road with large format camera looking at strange things, basically, and that's how I kind of worked, more of a sort of traditional photographer who kind of documentary approach, I suppose, heading out into the world and capturing things that I kind of came across.
Brendan, was that, sorry, just to stop you there, because I've got a particular interest in all those photographers. I've got books by all of them, and Stephen Shaw is a guy that constantly fascinates me, and hard to probably replicate what he did now, because it's kind of been done, isn't it? But it's interesting that you were sort of doing that. Was that a private, personal project, or was that something that you ended up publishing, or books, exhibitions, or was it just for you?
Yeah, no, I had a few sort of features and a couple of small exhibitions. I published a book of some of the work that I made in America, a series of motels, and a book that came out about 2 years ago in the States. And there's some of it. I think a lot of it's on the sort of archive section of my website, but it's quite strange when I do kind of artist talks and visiting lecturer work at universities and things, and I'm often I've not yet made the connection between what I'm doing now and what I was doing then, or how. That sounds sort of weird, but obviously, I mean, I always say to my students, there's two ways that you make interesting photographs. You put yourself in front of something interesting, so you head out into the world, and you're a documentary photographer or a landscape photographer. You kind of go in search of things, and whatever kind of happens in front of you, you capture to some extent. Or you put interesting things in front of yourself, so you work in the studio, portraits, portraits, still life, that kind of thing. So there's these sort of two different worlds, the observed world and the constructed world. And I used to be the kind of photographer like Stephen Shaw and Joel Sternfeld and the people that came before and after them. But now, obviously, with the nature of the way that I work, I have to kind of, because the cameras are less portable, and often I'm building a camera within a space, so I'm kind of required to construct things in front of it. It's a completely different way of working. And yeah, I'm yet to make the kind of when people often ask me basically how did I get to where I am now, and the short answer is I'm not 100% sure.
When I was looking at your videos earlier, I've watched 3 or 4 now, and I was looking at the one where you made images inside an old airfield tower. What do you call it? Air
control tower.
Yeah. And I found that interesting because I can't remember whether you'd actually blacked it out in the way that you did, but you actually seemed like you were bringing people either with you or students as models, but you're also using the surroundings, weren't you? You were finding found objects and bringing them into the image. So you were kind of transforming a space, but also putting interesting things in front of the camera as well. I mean, there's a young lady sitting on a chair holding a camera with leaves on her head, and then there were some bits of wire that you found hanging around the place, and you were doing interesting things with those. And that seemed to be slightly different to some of the other spaces you've transformed.
Yeah, I suppose that. I mean, that particular day was quite a significant day, actually, because yes, it was an old abandoned control tower near where I live, and I took a group of students there. And actually, on that particular day, I kind of set myself the challenge of slowing things down a little bit and taking the time to really kind of enable these students to operate the camera from technically, in order to allow them more creative control. So I kind of, often when you're trying to sort of share a process with someone, with a group or a person, or you're trying to kind of show things to people and get them, understanding it. If you're short of time, then it can end up being more of a demonstration. And of course, people don't really learn if they're just shown things. They learn when they get to do things. So that particular day, in the morning, we spent, a couple of hours really talking them through the process of, composing an image on the screen and focusing with this kind of, butchered whiteboard with magnets that we use to hold the paper, and then talking them through the kind of photographic process and got them mixing the chemicals, and making the contact prints, and shooting paper negatives. And then I kind of walked away, basically, and kind of left them to it. And of course, I was listening in, was moving, doing other things in the building, constructing other spaces, and of course, every now and then I'd put my head in, and I could see that they were struggling with something, and kind of resisted the temptation to kind of go in and fix it for them, basically. So although it took them longer in the short term to kind of get results, in the long term, because they kind of were solving problems themselves and they're really understanding the process that they were working with, it meant that they kind of moving forward longer term, they have a more deeper understanding of the process, but also they had a more personal and intimate and meaningful relationship with the work that they made, because they had more of a hand in it. And that's a kind of big part of the more kind of community based and facilitative and educational stuff that I do. Is actually, rather than being a kind of often in many ways, I'm in those kind of circumstances. I'm not the photographer at all. Often I'm kind of just enabling other people, so more of a, director, I suppose, or conductor. And that's when things get really exciting for me, is when you can kind of help and engage other people and allow them or encourage them or work with them to create their own things that they have a connection to.
When you're looking at a space to transform into a camera, because I certainly the most graphic and striking one was that skyscraper on the what was it, 40-something floor, was it?
46th floor, yeah.
Yeah, 46th floor of 101 Park Avenue, 26,000 square feet, 160 windows, and you were challenged with doing panoramas of Manhattan. I mean, so apart from that one, that's the most striking one. But then I found that and we can talk about that. But what are you kind of looking for in a building? Are you going out and actively looking, or are you being approached by people? And what's that sort of process?
Yeah, it's a mixture, I suppose. I mean, the New York one, I was approached with that particular project in that particular space. Often it's just somewhere that's accessible and that you have the ability to transform and I suppose you, as I said before, you've kind of got these two options. You can kind of either construct something in front of the camera or just sort of photograph the view that's there. And that's something I want to do a little bit more of, actually, is kind of identifying views that that kind of strike my interest, maybe, or kind of might make an interesting photograph, and then find a kind of building that looks onto that view and transform that into a camera in the same way that I did with the skyscraper. But of course, I'd love to do something like monuments, doing something in the Great Wall of China, take a brick out of the Great Wall of China and turn that and the inside of that into a camera, or, section off a bit of the Eiffel Tower or Statue of Liberty, or I don't know, there's loads of obviously landmarks that you could potentially turn into cameras. But then of course, all the other option is of course photographing those landmarks from the vantage point of a building that looks out onto it.
Well, I mean, New York is, of course, such an iconic location. You must have jumped at the opportunity when you got approached to go and do this. Do you want to just tell us how that evolved and some of the challenges you faced and who you got involved in the project, and presumably you had students were locals, and tell us all about that and what they got out of it and the challenges they faced, that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously that was a no-brainer. I was walking to work one morning and stopped at the bus stop and checked my emails, and there was an email from this company who are based in LA, sort of creative production company called Favorite Child Creative, and they said they represented one of their clients owned a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, and would I like to turn the 46th floor of it into a camera? So obviously it was a yes. And what was cool about that actually is that there's a film that the one you mentioned actually, where we turned the control tower. It's in a film that Ilford made last summer. And the two of the producers that worked for this company had seen that film, and all credit for them really for having the kind of foresight to kind of see what we did that day with the control tower and think, oh, if you can do it in an abandoned, a small, relatively small building, then can you do it in a space this big? And of course, the answer is yes. So, any room that you can turn black can become a camera. So yeah, like 4 weeks later, after I had to obviously ship all my a bunch of my kind of the lenses and stuff that I use and some of the kind of specific equipment we had to ship out there, and then they kind of brought in all the papers and chemicals and rigged up a sink, and I had these troughs custom made from Richards in Hull that we had shipped out there to develop these huge rolls of paper. And got there, walked up into this, got the elevator up to this floor and walked out, and there you have 360-degree open views of the New York skyline, which was pretty magic. Yes, and then so I was working with two groups of students, young adults from two local foundations, the Aperture Foundation, and a place called Red Hook Labs that work with kids from sort of underserved neighbourhoods around New York. And they all came up on the Saturday, I think it was, and we blacked out the space using these kind of foam core boards that we'd had pre-cut to save some time, and about 50 rolls of gaffer tape, or duct tape as they call it. And then we had this completely pitch black space, put a lens in it, opened up the lens, and of course the light pours in and you can see the outside world projected in, upside down, back to front in all its glory. And then we set about kind of making images with it. So that involved, I had this huge big kind of magnetic board, 8x4 foot board on wheels made out there, and then rolled out photographic paper and put it onto this board using magnets to kind of hold it around, and then would make an exposure, allowing light to come through the lens and expose onto the paper, and then roll that up. Obviously, getting a trays, photographic trays, 8x4 foot would not be very practical. So we'd roll up the paper and then feed it through these chemical troughs, and then that would give us a huge paper negative, which then, of course, we had to turn into a positive by just a really simple contact process. So when the negative's still wet, just place it on top of a fresh piece of paper. And then obviously we didn't have an enlarger that big, so we just used about 6 or 7 iPhone torches, waved it around over the paper, put it back through the chemicals, and you have a positive print.
Now, I saw you in I don't know if it was in that video or probably in your caravan when you had folks in there, or maybe it was the container camera, and you were like kind of waving a torch around, and I thought, well, that doesn't seem a very controlled way of doing a contact print. Do you do test strips, or have you just got enough experience now to know that you have to wave your torch around for a certain amount of time to get a print?
Yeah, basically that. Yeah, I can kind of tell looking at the negative how depending on how thick it is, roughly what it's going to be, whether it's going to be sort of 10 seconds or 20 seconds. But I mean, it was funny when you were talking about master printers earlier. Like, I mean, if a master darkroom printer saw me working in the caravan or the container or any of these spaces, they would have a heart attack, because it's quite pretty not it's pretty loose, let's put it that way. But I mean, for me, that's kind of part of it in a way. It's about the kind of playful and the kind of ad hoc kind of problem solving elements of it, and just being able to produce something that has a kind of not necessarily a really high end quality. And obviously when you've taken a paper negative out of you've developed it and fixed it and washed it a little bit, but by the end of the day, often if I'm working in the caravan, for instance, my water tray, my wash bath or whatever is a bit contaminated, chemicals are everywhere. So often you get, and the paper's still wet, so you get these bubbles, you get these kind of air pockets, you get these kind of watermarks around the print, but it adds a kind of charm to it. It gives it a kind of, becomes part of the process and part of the kind of experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was one of the things that made the pictures, actually, the fact that you could see some of these visible marks. And it just shows that, well, these are people just doing these things by hand in some very trying circumstances, really. And it just adds to the final image, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one time I had a sort of artist residency thing last summer in this sort of gallery space. And I built a big stud wall in the middle of the room, to separate the room into 2 sections. So the back would be the camera and dark room, and the front was a sort of studio. And I'd set up backdrops, I had multiple lights, and I was doing a series of portraits of people kind of coming in and out. And I remember really, I was controlling the light, and I was drying the prints and making proper contact prints under an enlarger. And I got this one particular print out as of a friend of mine and her daughter, and the background's perfectly lit, they're perfectly in focus, there's, the tones are all spot on. And I remember showing it to a friend of mine who's a photographer, who knows my process well. We've worked together on a number of things. And he just looked at it and went, it's a bit rubbish, isn't it? And I was like, oh my God, I've just spent ages.
Too good.
Fine. And he was like, it looks like you've shot it on a, medium format roll of film and made an enlargement, it lost all of the charm and the kind of playfulness and the immediacy of the process, and especially when you're working with other people. And as I say, that kind of if I wanted to create kind of really well composed, balanced and perfectly lit kind of images, I wouldn't make cameras out of caravans and watermelons, I suppose.
No, and I mean, making paper negatives and contact printing is not, you're not going to get perfect by its very nature. You're not going to get perfect results, are you? Because paper negatives give a certain look when you make contact prints out of them. Absolutely,
yeah, totally, and as I said before, it's part of the fun of the whole process, really. Is and I think also for me is that I'm sort of less and less as I kind of move through my career of photography, less and less interested in photographs actually, and more interested in the process, and it's the kind of what you do and the time and the energy and the engagement and the excitement of the making, whether that be of the camera itself and then the kind of process that you use. That's for me the really exciting and the fun bit. And so I think that's one of the reasons that sometimes the kind of processes that I use, and I've started developing a way of shooting color, and it's even more kind of drawn out and kind of convoluted, and it's just delaying the kind of image, the capturing of the final picture, because that's the kind of anticlimax, I think, for me, in a way. It's the bit that leads up to it that I enjoy the most.
You clearly get a tremendous kick, and you come alive when folks get engaged in it, whether they're students or whether they're people who've wandered in off the park in Exeter, to say, well, or you've approached somebody who's perhaps too shy to to come and talk to you, or the bikers in Exmoor, was it Dartmoor rather?
Yeah.
Those that seems to me that's you get a real kick out of those engagements.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's been really exciting, and the shipping container was kind of pulled together a lot of my kind of previous experiences, inviting people into the space and working with groups of people to either run a workshop where it's kind of a more kind of educational side to it, or people just to come along and experience the process and have their picture taken. But one of the I also work a lot with really kind of diverse audiences and community groups, and people with special learning needs and or mental ill health, or people from kind of different socioeconomic backgrounds. And when the shipping container, for instance, was I made that wheelchair accessible, which allowed me to kind of really open up the doors to it, literally and metaphorically, to a really, really broad and diverse audience. I worked with a couple of groups from the local Deaf Academy, which was fascinating, working in a almost dark, pitch black space with people with hearing impairment, with like one red torch and a signer who's kind of communicating and translating what I'm doing. I have to do my best to kind of make, and I suppose because the process is so visual, no matter what people's ability, as long as they're sighted, they can, there's something to kind of engage with, no matter what their kind of cognitive abilities are.
The young people you worked with in, taking you back to the Skyscraper for a moment, Brendan, the young people you worked with there, that you say they came from, what is it, the Aperture Foundation and something else you mentioned?
And Red Hook Labs.
Red Hook Labs. So what did they get out of that at the end of the day, and what do you follow up with them to see, have they just sort of thought, oh, that was an interesting experience, or have they taken that on board? Have they developed an interest in picture making, photography, or whatever?
Well, actually both groups were already, their photography kind of their groups basically. I think the Aperture Foundation probably a little bit from more sort of affluent areas, and Red Hook Labs from underserved areas, and I follow a number on Instagram and get messages every now and then. But I suppose what was really exciting about that project for me, and hopefully for them as well, was it had to be a kind of collaboration. So we had one day where there was 20 students, so all 21, including myself, blacked out the space. We opened up the lens and we kind of viewed the obscura, the projected image and the camera obscura. And then on the days after that, we had sort of 3 days of workshops. On each day, a group of 6 or 7 of those students would come back, and we'd spend the day making these giant images that you see in the video. And from the project. And of course, if you're dealing with 8x4 foot pieces of paper, then I can't physically. Or it's challenging. I have kind of tried a few on my own, but it's really challenging doing that with just one person. You need loads of people to hold the paper and fix it in place, and roll out the to kind of position the huge pieces of paper on top of the other pieces of paper during the contact process, and also so it really was a kind of collaboration and loads of kind of problem solving as we went along. Lots of kind of we noticed on the first couple of shots that because of the difference in the light that's hitting the top of the Empire State Building and the light that's hitting the street below it, there's such a kind of there's about 3 or 4 stops difference in there. So we were, and the papers are really high contrast and not very good dynamic range when you're shooting paper negatives often. And so got hold of a gradient neutral density filter, gradiated neutral density filter, I think. Does that make sense?
Yep, grey grad.
That's it. And then had to sort of attach that to the lens and lots of gaffer tape, cardboard, and bits of timber lying around. And so in answer to your question, I think my hope is that that being involved in something on that scale and producing things that are that kind of relatively unique in the scheme of things, and all through that having to kind of problem solve and basically make it up as we went along, quite frankly. There's lots of those kind of transferable skills, even if they don't carry on working, with camera obscuras and large analog photographic processes and papers and things. There's lots that I hope that they kind of gain from the day, the collaborative way of working, ability to solve, create solutions from difficult problems. Hopefully they kind of, I can see that as they kind of, some of them moving forward and the stuff that they're posting online and stuff. It's really exciting stuff.
Well, I was just going to say, if I can just jump in on the
certainly.
problem solving side of things, and this is going to apply whether you're trying to use a Skyscraper or a honeydew melon pinhole camera or whatever. Actually, no, that's a pinhole camera, so it doesn't quite count with that one. But or you one of your bread cameras or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You've got to make a decision on the lens that you're going to use, and I'm just wondering about how that process works, because I adapt lenses, but in a easier way, to different digital cameras or whatever. But your parameters are quite different, and I'm just wondering how you go through that decision-making process, because I get this feeling there are going to be some things are going to be, such as that building might actually be easier for you to make your decision what lens to use than it will be if you've got something that's a little bit more tightly constrained and things like that. In other words, how to deal with focus and where the film sits and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. So I mean, that's in all honesty, that's why I make predominantly 4x5 cameras or large format cameras, because you can have a ground glass, as I think I mentioned earlier, and then you place your lens, and as long as that you've got the right focal length for the lens, which allows you to to focus, whether that's from infinity to whatever point between infinity and close up, you can project it onto it. And the cameras that I've made that are medium format or used medium format film or 35mm film, I mean, to be honest, they're usually either fixed focus or I'm just guessing the focus really and hoping I get something right. I've not actually built like a kind of lens reflex camera yet. I've got a few ideas, and I've made a couple of kind of rudimentary twin lens cameras. When I made one, I think there's one on my website that I made out of junk, basically stuff from a scrap store nearby. But in answer to your question, I mean, generally, to be quite honest with you, if I'm using a kind of an existing object or thing, or whether it's a loaf of bread or a blog, then it's the kind of width of the object itself which will determine the lens. So if I've got a log that's 20 centimeters wide, then I'm going to be using a kind of, to get this right now, 250mm lens, say, with a and I can chuck some bellows or something on the front that lets it move in and out, so I can kind of have some kind of focal range or kind of have different be able to focus on a range of focal points from infinity to close up. To be honest with you, so much of most of what I do is trial and error and holding. I've got a lens, and it's an old battered one that I found somewhere, and the focal length has been scratched off it, and so I just hold it up and shine the torch through it and project it onto the wall, so you can kind of work out, roughly what the focal length is. And lots of. I've got a kind of a big shipping container just full to the brim with parts and bits and old cameras that I've butchered and taken apart, and that's how most of them kind of come together, really. Just like, oh, I wonder if that will fit on this, and if I just tape that there and see how it works.
Yeah. Now that leads me to somewhere where I've got a particular interest. You've just said there about you might come across a lens and you can't actually. There are no markings on it. You don't really know what it is, and you said that you would shine a light through it and project it onto a wall. Could you talk through that process in a little bit more detail for the things that you're looking for?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so obviously I say obviously there'll be some people that won't be aware, so I would explain for those that don't. So the focal length of a lens, let's say it's a 300 millimeter lens. That's the distance that it focuses. So the infinity will focus 300 millimeters or 30 centimeters away from the lens. And then as the subject gets closer to the lens, the focal point, the point that the ground glass needs to be, the focal point, gets further and further away. So there are equations that you can use to work all that out. But basically, if infinity focuses about 30 centimeters, exactly 30 centimeters away, so you have your lens and then 30 centimeters back, you have your ground glass. If your subject stood 2 meters away, then it's probably going to be something like 40, 45 centimeters, maybe something like that. So the distance that my lens needs to move backwards and forwards in order to be able to focus from infinity to someone stood a portrait a couple of meters away is sort of 15 centimeters. So I often use the bellows that you get off the front of an enlarger, for instance, and they usually have about that, a little bit more movement in it. But a simple way to kind of test the focal length of a lens is I suppose simply to sort of make a camera obscura, to black out your room, put the lens in the window, and then hold a piece of white card or paper or translucent material, tracing paper or anything really, behind the lens, and where infinity is. If you can point your room camera, your obscura, at the horizon, then you can kind of see where the focal length is. But the other way I do that is to put a torch, really bright light, basically one side of the room, and then at the other side of the room, sort of hold the lens up, pointing at the light, and the light and then with that lens backing onto a wall, and then you can move the lens backwards and forwards and get a rough idea about how if the light is say 10 meters away from the lens and the lens needs to be 40 centimeters away from the wall for the light from the torch to be in focus, then you've got a rough idea of what the focal length of that lens is. So
just that point there about the what you're actually looking for with that projected image of the torch shining through the lens onto the wall. Mm-hmm. And you say that what does a focused image look like with that torch shining through?
Oh, it's just a bright focused torch, so you can see the kind of filament of whatever bulb it is in focus coming into
right.
It's a sort of blurry light, and then it comes ping into sort of focus. And whether it's I just use whatever's around, whether it's my iPhone torch or a work light or something like that.
Yeah, and the other thing from there, I assume you can also then measure the image circle, the projected image circle as well of the lens. Would that be true?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that I'd use the torch is that in that context is that you don't really have to have a black room, because the brightness of that torch is so bright that you can do it in a just turn the lights off. It's night time. It's so you get an idea of the focal length. If you want to find out the image circle, then you'd need to make a camera obscura, I think, or put it on a large format camera and see if it covers the glass.
Yeah.
Simon, I remember listening to an episode probably quite an early episode of the Homemade Camera podcast. I don't know if you listened to that, Brendan, but it's I would imagine it's right up your street. It's been going. It's been going a while now. And in some of their early episodes, they were just talking about taking different elements of the camera and talking about different ways of fabricating them. And they were talking about determining sort of focal lengths. And I think it was either Nick or Graham was talking about putting your lens that you had no idea about really, and just sort of taping it to a tube. And I'm thinking like a couple of Pringles tubes, one inside the other, and then with a piece of tissue paper or some translucent stuff over the other end, you slide it in and out like a telescope, and at some point it comes into focus, and then you just measure that distance between the I guess the whatever part of the lens is you're judging it from, the sort of nodal point, or whatever that is, to the ground glass, and that's roughly your focal length.
Yeah, that's a way better way of doing it, actually.
Well, I was just going to say there's a couple of things there. There's one, if the lens is of a telephoto design, I think that messes with your measurements.
Well, telephoto by definition is about where the image focuses, whether it focuses closer or beyond. It's a bit like it's the opposite to one of those wide angle lenses, isn't it? Which have, what do they call that, retro focus or something?
Yeah. Well, I think the point being is I don't think there's a specific correlation between 300. I'm not sure if a telephoto lens, which was 300 millimeters, will be 300 millimeters.
No,
I think it'll be shorter.
I think so. Yeah.
But that's one thing. But there is another way of measuring the focal length. This is what I do with weird and wonderful lenses, although not large format, generally speaking. And that's to mount it onto adapters. So you end up with your which
tubes. You can buy from Simon, by the way.
No. Well, there's a few on, but not enough to be able to do this. It's more about extension tubes, to be fair. And right. So you put those onto your camera, and to get to the point where you can actually reach a focused image. It doesn't necessarily have to be at infinity, and then what you would do once you've got to the point where you can take a photograph of something, you then look at it and think, well, that feels like it's a X millimeter lens. You then dig out a zoom lens of some description from the same position and try and actually replicate the focus that you've achieved, even though it's obviously going to be cropping the image circle massively, but that doesn't matter because it's about what's going on at the center of the image. And that's how I found out that like some old Tessar lenses that I've had something like about 292 millimeters, because I would check it against a 60 to 300 millimeter zoom lens. So it's a really quick way of doing it.
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah, I mean that's for the sort of smaller cameras. And the stuff that I make, that kind of anything between, as you say, 90 mil to sort of 250, 300 mil. That sounds like a really good way of doing it too. But I mean, things get a little bit more. You have to get a bit more creative when you're dealing with the kind of larger lenses. I mean, yeah. I've just got hold of a 70-inch lens which is about 1,780 millimeter. Which is I haven't actually tested. I've not kind of reached the edge of it yet, basically. But the lenses that I use for the sort of bigger camera obscuras, and like in New York, for instance, that one I was using there was a 1,210 mil process lens, which projects an image circle. Well, you can see on some of these images made, you can see the sort of vignette of the image of the edge of the image circle coming in at around about 5 or 6 feet. This new lens that I've got, if my calculations are correct, it should cover the whole kind of 8 by 4 foot. Obviously the paper only comes up to 4 feet wide. It's 50 inches, I think, and it rolls of 100 feet or whatever it is. I'm looking forward to trying that one out. And I've been working with colour a little bit recently, and I found a place, B&H Photo, or B&H in New York, sell rolls of colour paper that's 50 inches wide and 196 feet long. So I'm just working on a way of shooting, sort of 5 by sort of 6 by 4 feet colour giant prints using this new lens.
I'm glad you've gone on to that subject, because that's something that it's not that long ago on Instagram where there was a chap wearing a lumberjack shirt, I think it was, in some woods somewhere, and
go on, sing the song.
No, no, we don't want to lose any more listeners. Actually, that's a good point. Let's just quickly give a shout out to your Instagram account, which is Brendan Barry Photo. So everybody run to that, and you can also see the mouldy cheese camera pre-mold is on there as well, and the pumpkin camera as well, which is looking really good. But yeah, there's a video on there. And it's just captivating because there's something really odd going on there, because I was chatting to one of the people at our darkroom last night, and I was saying that we've got Brendan Barry coming on, and he was like saying, "Oh, I've just got so many questions." He goes, but he didn't give me any of those questions. But one of the areas the main area that we were discussing is about what you're doing with these shooting on colour paper and doing stuff with black and white chemicals, then colour chemicals, and then is it you're shooting with an orange filter? Basically, my head had gone. So I'm just wondering if you can explain what on earth you were doing there, apart from it looking amazing.
Yeah, I'll summarise it. It's quite. I mean, I don't know. It's like anything really. Once you kind of know how, obviously things are a little bit easier. But for a while, I was fully aware that I could do what I was already doing, i.e., shooting paper negatives and then contact printing into a positive image with colour paper. You could put a piece of colour photographic paper into the camera, make a colour paper negative, put that paper negative on top of another piece of paper and shine light through it, and you'd have a positive. But of course, you've got colour balance to deal with. So you'd have to balance the light coming into the lens, so your negative was balanced, or you'd probably have to balance the light coming from whatever light source you're using to create to balance the light when you create your your positive print from your negative. Whether you need to do it both times, or if you could just do it, you probably wouldn't need to. You could have an unbalanced negative, I suppose. Most all negatives are, I suppose, unless you're shooting transparency, and then you'd have to filter the light. Anyway, but obviously you can already tell that sort of gets complicated, and there's loads of things you have to deal with. It's not exactly that fast. You're also having to sort of think about colour chemistry and the different kind of temperatures that works more effectively at, and heating baths and things like that. So I'd kind of written it off really, and thought it was just a bit too complicated or convoluted, or it just wouldn't be that kind of wouldn't be as much fun, basically. And then I kind of came across somewhere and spent quite a few months kind of researching and kind of finding out, because there's not a lot of information out there, or there is, but it's in weird places, this kind of color reversal process, which is basically what I'm using. So shooting onto color paper, developing it using kind of black and white chemistry to make a negative, and then doing a second exposure to light, and then processing a normal RA4 chemistry, and having to filter the light coming into the lens. So you can see it's sort of quite a convoluted process. But the great thing about it, as you'll see on my Instagram, is that once you've created your negative, you can then you can develop and fix the positive in daylight. So in terms of the sort of, because the big part of the way that I work is there's a kind of performative nature to it as well, where you can draw people in and seeing the image projected inside a camera, and then the image coming alive in the tray as it develops. It's such a magical experience that it never gets boring. And obviously this new process that I'm working with and developing, where you can have a color image appearing in the tray, but it happening in daylight, is just really exciting, and that's where I'm kind of going next. But interesting, as you said, yeah, the video, it's the video of the image emerging, which is the really exciting bit, and actually probably for me more interesting and exciting than the finished print. So I'm also starting to work a little bit more with video and kind of videoing that as it comes alive, and kind of got some plans for some installations and stuff working in that way, video installations and things.
Yeah, I'm just you get quite mesmerised just looking at the videos of it. And as you're saying, yeah, there's something. I mean, we're photographers and we like stills, but there is just something really, really special when you're just looking at how this looks. And there's a whole look about it as well, isn't there? When it's still wet, and you can see these orange things going on, and it's just absolutely beautiful. It's almost like you wish you could just freeze it at that point. It's complete abstraction, but who cares? It's just wonderful. It also looks like you got a load of pine needles and bits of tree in there as well. Is that what's going on?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, it got really windy and all the leaves fell down into the tray.
Have you seen this, Andrew? Have you seen the video?
No, I haven't been on Brendan's Instagram site. I was just about to go on while you were talking. I was asking some questions earlier, and I asked some quite insightful questions. Everyone ignored me. Then I realised my microphone was on mute. So they were so insightful, I can't remember what they were now.
I was going to say that this would be a good time to ask them, but I just think that the whole process that you're developing there is just wonderful, and it's certainly as you're saying that the performative side of things. I mean, if there's ever a way to get people interested in, it looks like you found it now.
Well, I'm looking at a picture. Yeah, so there's a guy with a nuclear firestorm behind him,
exactly,
in a lumberjack shirt.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, if there's ever a way to get people that don't really understand this, or they're not really that bothered about shooting with film, you show them something like this, and they're just going to be, need to look at that. That's the way to go.
Oh, something else here as well. So, sorry, I'm getting excited now looking at Instagram. Great, isn't it? Because you can just leap around. So you've got this red telephone box, Brendan.
Oh yeah.
Now, in a village near where I live, and okay, Americans, you're going to love this. It's called Prick Willow. Okay, there's this village in the Fens called Prick Willow, and in Prick Willow, you can Google it. You'll see Prick Willow telephone box exhibition space. You can hire this telephone box and have an exhibition in it. And I was chatting to somebody on the Lensless podcast recently, Joe Baker, who did just that. He did a series of hand-coloured photographs of the mausoleum in London that inspired the designer of these phone boxes. And so he had black and white images and he painted them red. Now, wouldn't it be great to I might do this. I might approach Prick Willow town council, village council, parish council, I don't know, and say, look, I'd like to actually make the photographs inside your telephone box, like Brendan's done here. Sorry to steal your idea, Brendan. And then have the exhibition inside the telephone box. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, perfect.
So you can find that. Folks can Google Prick Willow telephone box exhibition or something and see that. But I was just, so not only can you have your exhibition inside the box, but take the pictures from it. Because that was what I loved about the container pictures, Brendan. You then took that space and did an exhibition. And how cool was that?
Yeah, that was really fun. Yeah, because as I mentioned before, the front wall of the container was a kind of stud wall on wheels that I'd built, which is what allowed it to be wheelchair accessible, because the whole wall you could just...
I know, you just kind of unclipped it and moved it sideways.
Just wheeled it back, so you could...
That was brilliant.
Like opening up the front standard of your camera and sort of climbing inside.
Yeah.
And then obviously at the end, I just pushed it all the way to the back of the container, and it sort of slid under the workbench that I built for where the photographic trays went, and then just used little round magnets to attach the prints to the wall inside, so it went up super quick, came down super easy. It was kind of perfect space for it. I mean, that's the great thing about shipping containers. They're so multifunctional. You can use them for all sorts of different things. And, that one came in handy multiple times.
Where did you display the New York pictures? Because presumably there must have been an exhibition or something at the end of that.
Well, interestingly enough, they were in the Skyscraper. Again, we had an exhibition.
Yeah.
So at the end of that kind of project, we had partitioned off an element or a section of the floor and opened it back up to the light. And that was where I had an exhibition of all the work. And then the rest of the space the other sort of 3/4 just over of the whole floor. I opened because I placed different lenses all in different windows, and or different lens mounts. You could look out of any window basically in any direction and make an image from there. And at the end of the project, I positioned 13 different lenses with various different focal lengths around the space. So there's this kind of multi-camera obscure installation, so you can kind of walk through this space, and there'd be 13 different projected images on different kind of screens, basically translucent screens, so you could see them from both sides. You can walk through the space.
There's a Simon. Have you seen this picture of this 36-inch military aerial lens? It's even bigger than your Aero Ectar. So there's a guy holding it up, and it's like he's cradling it in his hand. And it would probably take 3 hand spans to go around the outer lens element. It's in Brendan's Instagram, just a bit down a bit. Have you seen that? Are you using that now, Brendan? That lens? What have you used that on?
Which one's that?
Well, you said it's it's quite a while ago actually, because people were commenting on this 49 weeks ago. So also sent off with this massive 36-inch military aerial lens.
Oh, yeah.
To see what he can do with it. It's a beast, is it?
Oh, so that's my friend Raf, who I gave him my 16 by 20 inch camera that I made, and he's converted it to shoot wet plate on it. And that was the first lens I think I used on the first camera that which was that one actually, the 16 by 20 inch. And so I've actually got 3. I've got 3 of them now. I've got another one of those lenses in my lockup, and another. And as I said, I've just got one that's twice the size of that, basically 70 inches. Yeah,
there's a picture of your homemade 16 by 20 camera, isn't there, on the kind of next to it, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Did you make the bellows for that as well? Because I noticed you'd made the bellows in your container cam.
Yes, I did. Yeah, those were the first bellows. Were they the first? I think those are the first bellows that I'd made, actually.
Oh, well done, you.
That's the reason I built a 16 by 20 inch camera, is because I just figured it would be way easier to build something bigger. I'd always wanted to make my own 4 by 5 inch camera. I figured the bigger you went, the less precise you had to be, so I could make more mistakes, and that's why I went big.
Well, that was something we chatted with Jeff last week, because he mentioned that he's actually producing a shutter, or he's working on producing a shutter for a camera, which is super difficult. And but it's a case of, well, if you're doing that with large format, it's a lot easier than it is if you're going to be doing it with 35mm, for instance. So because a lot of people want a shutter to be made available, if you like, for 35mm homemade cameras, and it's a really, really tricky thing to get right. But make it bigger makes it easier.
Yeah, totally.
So Brendan, you're involved in something called Positive Light Projects.
Positive Light Projects is a community interest company that I set up earlier this year, and it's a kind of organisation that I can kind of set up to run a kind of different educational experiences and opportunities with it. Basically, I currently teach on a higher education course, and which I really enjoy, but there's a kind of there's more diverse audiences that I sort of talked about earlier. I have a specific kind of cohort of students from a sort of relatively small kind of demographic of people, and Positive Light Projects is a company I set up that allows me to kind of offer other more immersive, more kind of inclusive, more diverse kind of educational opportunities and experiences for a broader range and more diverse group of people.
So these are analog photo workshops in Dartmoor, is it?
Well, that's the first kind of big project that I ran was the Dartmoor Summer School of Photography, which was this summer, which was a kind of week-long kind of residency, basically, I suppose, or kind of I suppose part retreat, part residency, part workshop, where I kind of opened it up, and there was 30 photographers from around the world that kind of came, and we had this centre that I'd kind of booked out, and we had various professional photographers running workshops. Had Jem Southam, who's a large format landscape photographer, Susan Durges, Sian Davey, and Jason Evans and myself running workshops, and then we had all sorts of other things going on. We had a harp player and a cultural environmentalist who came to talk about the landscape, and we had like amazing food and walks across Dartmoor up to Wistman's Wood, and just had this kind of week of just getting super geeky about photography and concepts and ideas up on the moors. And we made a kind of pop-up darkroom and transformed the outhouse into a camera obscura, making giant pictures with. So yeah, so Positive Light Projects is a company that I use, I set up to do stuff like that, stuff that's kind of really kind of experimental and playful and immersive, and so kind of stuff that I'm restricted from doing within working within an educational institution, basically.
And you have an Instagram, people can follow you on that or go to that Instagram page.
Yes, yeah, good. Oh, yeah, thanks for the what's that?
Positive Light Projects. I think if you just
Positive Light Projects, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I've just given you a follow. It looks great. It looks very peaceful.
Yeah, it was an amazing week. Yeah, and I'm just programming and curating the kind of lineup of people delivering workshops and stuff for next summer's event now as well. So if anyone
we'll do a link to that in the show notes, Brendan, so folks can take a look at that.
Thank you.
A couple of things, Simon. While you were talking earlier, while I was on mute, actually, I was looking at Brendan's archives, and because he'd mentioned the Stephen Shaw, the sort of work, Brendan, you were doing before you sort of evolved more into the camera building and space performing art photographer that you kind of are now. I mean, American surfaces and stuff like that when Stephen Shaw was traveling around kind of screams at me. And I did laugh. You've got this series of images called Clean Rooms, Low Rates, which are presumably the motel rooms you stayed in.
Yes.
I said to my wife and I have done a couple of road trips around America, but she's always insisted we stay in, quotes, nice places, you see. And I said, can we not, those iconic motel rooms, I just want to stay in some of those. Now, I'm sure these are clean and lovely, but these are, I'm going to show her when she comes home, I said, look, there you go, look, what's wrong with these? She says, I'm not staying in those, But they look clean, I have to say.
Some of them, yeah. If
your bed sheets look reasonably clean, I have to say, they're not yellow and stained.
Oh, well, that's the low light. Some of them were, there's one in particular, because I'd always seek out the cheapest and grottiest looking ones, but as you say, usually they're not too bad. A couple of them there was one that I found that was it was horrific. There was cigarette butts in the bed and cockroaches in the bed as well, and the bath. Oh, good, you don't even want to know what the bathroom looks and smells like. But those, I always found that the grottier and kind of more character, the grottier and kind of cheaper they were, the more character they seem to have, and the more kind of
the better photographs they made.
Exactly, yeah.
Did you ever find yourself, actually, some of them were so gross you actually slept in your clothes on top of the bedspread?
Yes, short answer.
I think I'd have taken like a polythene sheet with me to insulate myself between that and probably the bed bugs. Some of them do look proper dumps. Some of them look okay.
Yeah, some of them are lovely, and some of them.
Yeah, there's one there which is just like kind of white walls, and
that's the cigarette and cockroach one.
Yeah, and it's got a microwave balanced on top of a fridge, and it's just kind of horrible, isn't it?
That's the one.
Ooh, dear me. But you have to suffer for your art. You've got a Pepsi machine outside the room in one of your rooms, haven't you?
Yes, I believe there is. Yeah.
Excellent stuff. So check these out. Check out, because I love all this stuff. If you're not familiar with the work of Stephen Shaw and books like American Surfaces, and then the work he did the complete works of his photographs or something like that. Stephen Shaw's stuff. This is all classic. And I love the colour tones you're getting as well. The sort of purples and blues and brilliant stuff.
They're all. Those pictures they're shot. They're 4x5, a mixture of Fuji and Kodak, but they're all about 45 minutes or an hour long exposures.
So you're getting those reciprocity colour shifts and things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then was it also the ones Broken Roads? That's also in America, isn't it? It has to be.
Yeah, that's the kind of road trip journal, if you like.
Yeah.
Classic kind of, rite of passage, had to do it kind of thing.
Yeah, sleeping by the Mississippi's type stuff. This is...
Absolutely, yeah. That was a big influence on me.
Yeah. Fantastic stuff. I love this. I'd go to America every year And I've yet to go with my large format camera, but yeah, maybe one day.
I'd like to take things in a different direction. I don't know if you'd be able to help me there, but you've doing what you've been doing with colour in weird and wonderful ways. I'm wondering, is there, if you can give me some advice on something I'd like to do. I've got a shot that I did on Provia film with a Hasselblad it was, and it's a long exposure, and it doesn't work in colour. When I scanned it into my computer, I like the image, but there's just way too much of a magenta shift in it to be useful. But it works really, really well in black and white, and it's a long exposure. The clouds look good, and all of those kind of things. And I'd like to print that slide film in black and white. Can either of you suggest a way about how I can actually achieve that from a positive slide image?
Well, I probably won't have as good an answer, but my instinct would be to do something really convoluted, like just put it in a black and white enlarger and make effectively you then make a negative print. So you shine light through it onto normal photographic paper, and you'd create a negative print, and then you could contact that print, or you could, I suppose, I don't know if you could use the Harman Direct Positive paper. I don't know what would happen if you used slide film colors. I mean, obviously, if you shoot with color negatives onto black and white, you can get an image kind of contrast. I think you get really low contrast, is it? Or
yeah, you normally have to end up using a higher contrast, don't you? If it's like a color neg.
Yeah.
Someone was at Graham Jago, I think, was asking about this on Twitter, and I think normally you have to stick a high contrast neg in.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But you could do what you said would work, wouldn't it? If
yeah,
you just
got Direct Positive, yeah.
I think so. That can be quite a contrasty paper, so you could... but you could just try it, or you could just give it a little bit of pre-exposure, Simon, that would bit of pre-flashing, soften it up a bit.
What could you explain that to me? Because I've heard this term pre-flashing. What's that going to do?
Well, in conventional darkroom terms, it's probably easier to talk about that than it is because it's back to front with Harman Direct Positive. But with conventional darkroom printing, if you were having trouble burning in highlights because you've got a negative that's just, the highlights are just so far away from the shadows, but there's some detail there, but you're just having trouble controlling them, without using a really soft filter which just gives you an overall muddy print, then you can do something called pre-flashing the paper. So and each paper stock you have would have a certain limit at which point the paper starts to take on tonality. So if you expose the paper to light before it has any recognizable tonality, you're kind of sensitizing it a little bit more to light. So your highlights, you'll find, will print a lot easier, and you'll print with some highlight density. You can overdo it and end up fogging the paper. So you would do a test in the darkroom and take a strip of paper, put your enlarger up to its top height, stop it down, and then do a series of test exposures, maybe 1 second up to 10, develop it. If you've got a completely blank sheet of paper, then open up the lens a little bit more. And what you're looking for is a series of the first identifiable tonality in the test strip, the first change to tonality, then you go back one before you see that, and that's your flashing point, your maximum point at which you might want to pre-flash the paper. So it's just before you get the first tone on the sheet, so you can sensitize the paper and it'll help with your highlights. With Harman Direct Positive, it's the other way around. So you're looking for the first time it goes from black to white, I think, and then it's the one before that. But there's quite an interesting little bit on Harman's website about pre-flashing Direct Positive paper, but it is the other way around from conventional flashing. But with Ilford's new paper, this Multigrade 4 Deluxe, all I've seen and read and heard, from John Whitmore and Graham Jago and Lena Bessanova, I think it just seems to be a wonderful paper, and I guess if you combine that with split grade printing, you probably will never have much of a problem with burning in your highlights, as long as your negatives are under control.
Well, just a quick one on pre-flashing there as well, because one thing I learned last night is our supply of grade 2 Jessop's paper on 7x5 at the darkroom is fogged, and that
is that just by age? Is that just from age?
Don't know, but certainly my print came, we did it with grade 3, and then it was suggested, as a learning exercise as much as anything, do it on grade 2 with the same settings, and obviously you got to do your test strips and stuff, but just see the difference. And they were awful. There were no whites in it at all, and then we developed a blank sheet in it, and it came out with a hint of grey in it. But would that be effectively pre-flashing as well?
Well, if you've got fogged paper, it could just be down to age, and I think you can. Brendan, you might know that. You can add a bit more. I want to say potassium bromide to the developer, and that helps against fogged paper. But
rings a bell. But
rings a bell with me too. So folks will soon put me straight once they listen to this podcast. Or they'll go on the Large Format Photography Podcast Facebook group and tell me. So you can. I think it's a bit of potassium bromide, but I'm not sure how much or what dilution. That helps with old fogged paper. But you don't want to see, the idea of pre-flashing, Simon, is that you don't actually want to see the result of the pre-flashing. You're sensitizing the paper, but not so you get a noticeable tonality. In fact, you use the same process. It's quite useful if you want to test the safe lights in your darkroom, because really you should test them using paper that has been pre-flashed, so that you make it as sensitive as you possibly can to the safe lights. So,
Okay.
Or you just buy. This is what I was saying to you recently. There is a danger in using all this old material, in that you get disheartened because basically you're getting crap results. So, so if paper's really bad, I wouldn't persevere with it, to be honest. I know it was free and you were given it, but you don't want people to just say, "Well, this is just rubbish. I'm not doing this."
And that's fair enough. I mean, but it's a case of this grade 3 that I used, and I've produced an acceptable result from it. Yes, it's old, and it took like good 2 minutes in the developer before it needed to be removed. And I'm sure if it was fresher, it wouldn't have taken anywhere near that long. But it gave an image that I was happy with. The grade 2 is fogged, and nobody's ever going to be happy. But I think it was good as a learning process to actually understand, why aren't these photographs working, and then you start to go through the process of eliminating what all the problems are, and then someone has the bright idea. Well, what if the paper's fogged? And then you just check the paper and so on. So it was, although I didn't produce anything useful out of it, it was a good learning experience. And it's that thing about learning through getting things wrong. I think it's just hugely useful.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, you've learned, know what fogged paper looks like. And you could actually do a bit more research and find out, actually, I think there might be something I can add to the developer to try and reduce the effect. But don't quote me.
Yeah, I'm more likely to just get some newer paper.
Yeah. Okay, so folks listening, you might just detect a slight change in tone of or level in Brendan's recording, because he just dropped out a bit and had to go and plug his device in. So, but you're back, Brendan. That's the main thing.
Yes, I am indeed.
So I just wanted to ask you, just steer you onto it. It's all very well. Listen. Watermelons, bread, mannequin, squash, enlarger, skyscraper, Lego, log, shepherd's hut, apple, gazebo, pineapple, shed. But none of them come anywhere near caravans, do they? So I'm clearly not going to be converting our caravan into a camera, because I would just get destroyed by my missus. But I do have plans to do things photographic in the caravan, wholesome, clean things, outdoor living type things. But you have a caravan with which you wheel around and park in Dartmoor and take pictures of folk, and it's brilliant, and you can see it on your YouTube videos. And as soon as I saw it, and I'd seen it ages ago, and people said to me, "Oh, are you going to turn your caravan into a camera?" I said, no. But I immediately thought of Heather O'Class. Are you familiar with Heather's way of working? Do you know who I'm talking about?
No, who's that? Heather
O'Class, OAKLAUS, AUS, and she has a van, a yellow Kodak coloured van called Little Miss Sunshine, which she drives around with a hold. So she doesn't use a lens, so she's lensless, and she parks in front of something, and she projects through the hole onto the wall. And then she uses 8x10 sheets of paper in a matrix covering the whole side of the van wall. So she makes a negative image made up of all these separate 8x10 prints. When she's finished, she just unclips them and develops them. And then she does exhibitions with all these negatives, just so they're negative pictures, but your brain kind of sees it as a positive, So she doesn't make positive prints. She displays it as a working negative. So if you type in Heather, or if you look for Heather O'Class, Little Miss Sunshine, there's a whole world for you there. And we chatted with her on the Lensless podcast some time ago, but she's a lovely, lovely lady, and she exhibits her work all over different galleries and exhibition spaces in America. And she drives this yellow van called Little Miss Sunshine.
Oh, cool.
Anyway, I just what you're doing with your. I don't think she doesn't develop the images inside, because all she does is takes them all down off the wall, put them in a 8x10 box, and takes them home, because it's easy, isn't it? What you're doing with your caravan is more sort of engaging with folk, aren't you, and drawing people in.
Yeah, that's a big part of it for me. I simply put, the way that I work, like in the caravan, for instance, and that was where I first kind of realized, that this way of working was so kind of rewarding and exciting for me, is because it draws together the three things that I kind of love most about photography, and that's the kind of construction of a camera and the kind of use of of process, basically, and analog processes in particular. So the kind of mechanics and the practical and the technical sides of it, problem solving elements, as I've touched on before. There's that bit. There's the image making, of course, and the kind of composing and constructing of an image and the capturing of that image. And then the other element is that educational and facilitative and performance side of it, so drawing other people into it. So the kind of the building, the making, the image making, and the kind of teaching thing all gets to kind of mix together in the caravan or the shipping container or the skyscraper, those kinds of spaces that you can invite an audience in.
Yeah. So sorry, people listening, and even you, Brendan, her surname is spelled Oelklaus. I got that last bit right. If you type in Camera Karma, Karma, Heather Oelklaus, there's a nice YouTube video showing Little Miss Sunshine. Taking time with Heather O'Class and her pinhole camera truck. So a bit different from what you're doing, but that's what I thought of when I first saw your awesome caravan. Are you still using the caravan? Is that like a hobby for you now, taking the caravan?
Yeah, it's well, it in a way, like kind of the funny thing is that, like most photographers, you have a variety of cameras that you kind of pull out depending on the job or the work or that you're doing. So commercial photographer might have a kind of workhorse camera, but there might be specific jobs that they need to use a different camera or different range of lenses. And obviously for people who are kind of following their own creative or personal kind of endeavors, then you have different cameras for different subjects, or you kind of favor one over another depending on what you're working on. And kind of same for me in some ways, that they're just a little bit bigger and more impractical. So I can use the caravan camera and take it out on a kind of, it's great for just pitching up and taking out for the day. It's really good for sort of testing out processes as well. So the picture we talked about earlier, of the color picture of the guy in the lumberjack shirt in the woods, that was me wanting to test out this color process, and so I just hitched up the caravan for the day, took it up to this viewpoints, woodlands near me, and tested it out. Obviously with the shipping container, that's a little bit more, you got to pick that up with a crane and put it on the back of a lorry. But that's really good for if I'm doing an installation, working in a specific place for a longer period of time, and you can invite, plan it a little bit more and invite different people in. So, and then obviously I have my kind of transformation kit, which is a kind of briefcase, big kind of flight case of lenses and a massive stack of cardboard and a bag full of gaffer tape. And that's my other kind of more portable lens.
One thing about using a large boxes for your photography, it's. I mean, I've had to go back. I've gone back to 2015 just to confirm this in my head, because I was thinking it's got to be there, and then boom, found it, and that was wet plate collodion, and it just seems that what you're actually doing there is you could quite, well, I don't know about easily, but because you've got your own darkroom effectively inside the camera, it sort of lends itself to you doing that. But I can't see anything in your recent history about wet plate collodion. I'm just wondering, was that one of those things you went there, did it, and ticked that off and went somewhere else, or is that still part of your thinking process?
Yeah, I suppose I've got a couple of really good friends of mine are wet plate photographers, and I've kind of worked with them a little bit, and they've shared the process with me, and so I've kind of played around with it a few times, and I don't know, it's something. I suppose there's an element of it which is the. Obviously, I like long, drawn-out, convoluted processes, as I've sort of talked about before. Not to say that that's exactly what wet plate collodion is. It's but it's more. It is. You need to be really focused and dedicated to that particular way of working. And I think it's just working within the space, like the caravan. The toxicity levels, the kind of specific chemicals that you're using, and there's something about that process. There's something I really like about the kind of, working with paper and just being able to pick it up out of the tray. I suppose what I'm getting at actually is that with wet plate, you need to be really, really precise. The measuring of the chemicals, the spreading of the collodion on the glass, the exposure's got to be spot. And there's so many things that, yes, that precision, I think, that I'm, and it's that, it's just not for me, I don't think. As if anyone that's, has looked or does look at the work that I do, it's funny, there's a couple of kind of features and things that went online and on some blogs and websites early on, and it was some of the sort of, playful, silly cameras I was making. And some of the comments were, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He's just putting cameras inside of things, or he's just putting a lens on the front of something and a ground glass on the back. And, it's like, yeah, obviously, I mean, I'm not pretending to be anything other than that. It is playful, it's fun, it's meant to kind of play with our understanding a little bit of what a camera is and what it can do, and kind of pique people's interest. Hopefully, I don't pretend in any way, shape, or form to be like a master camera maker. And some of the people out there that can construct these beautiful just crafted kind of pieces of machinery that are works of art in themselves, and there's that kind of master craftsman, and and in the same way that I'm no way, would never be able to be a master printer, it's the same with the camera making. For me, it's just about bosh it together, see what happens. And
Brendan, there's plenty of old people out there with big hats and beards who'll tell you you're doing it wrong. I tell you, they'll soon tell you on Facebook or Instagram. But that's another discussion.
I ignore that basically.
Yeah, there's something there that you've just said there about being precise with wet plate, and it goes back to a comment that you were making earlier about how the imperfections in some of your photographs, in particular, we were talking about the one in New York, add something to the photograph. And I'm looking at a self-portrait at the moment, and I can see the imperfections. It's way down in your Instagram feed, and I can see the imperfections where it's not gone right, but to me that adds something to the shot. But I'm just thinking about when we had Joseph Brunges on the show where we talked in a fair bit of depth about wet plate collodion. And at the end of the show, we always, and we're going to have this conversation when we finish recording, about what artwork we're going to put on the cover for the show artwork. And I went through a lot of Joseph's work, because you've got to find something that's square, and it's got to have the ability, or at least can be cropped to square and have the ability to have the LFPP letters down the right hand side, and so on and so on. And I found an image, and it was taken of a firefighter in front of his truck, and it was perfect. It looked like it was collodion. It fitted everything, and Joseph goes, "Oh, that's one of my bad ones." And
that's great.
And that's the thing. He took the view. Well, you can actually see where I didn't actually coat the plate correctly. Whereas from a layperson's point of view, which we certainly are, I mean, we may know a bit about photography, but we don't know anything or very little about wet plate collodion. We look at it and think, well, that's wet plate collodion. That's what it's meant to look like, even though it's not. So it's just interesting how people's perceptions of the work can be completely different from the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I really admire wet plate collodion photographers. As I said, I've got two close friends that use it, and I maybe that's something to do it as well. I kind of, in all honesty, I've played with it. I've shot a few pictures with it and stuff, but I wouldn't pretend to really understand the ins and outs of the process, or be able to kind of create some of the wonderful work that you see out there. And sometimes it's nice just to kind of keep something from a distance that you can admire. And I think I'm not sure. Not one for me. But yeah, it's such a fantastic process. The people that kind of really do control it, hats off.
I'm in awe of your bellow making skills, I have to say.
Well, don't look too closely. That's probably what I would say. But again, I just kind of winged them, really. I just found some various kind of designs and stuff online, and a couple of the earlier ones that I made that were sort of the smaller cameras. I made one camera made out of an enlarger that I had to be sort of quite a bit more precise because it was tapered. But the ones for the shipping container, I just made it up as I went along, to be perfectly honest. But they work a treat.
They look fascinating. They do. But I feel like asking some questions, but I do actually think that we need to bring things to a close, or at least start winding down. So firstly, I'm going to say, Rendon, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you.
Oh, thanks for having me on. No, it's been fun. Yeah, I've really enjoyed chatting to you guys.
Yeah, no. As you would half expect, really, as somebody involved in education, the way that you explain the weird and wonderful things that you do, it's you just make it very easy to understand things. So really appreciate
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Right. Well, before we do shout outs and things like that, I just want to say thank you to the people I forgot to say thank you to last time, which was only 5 days ago, so nothing's actually changed. And that's with our coffee donations. That's ko-fi.com. If you go to there and try and find classic lenses, not classic lenses. No. Well, you can do, but not for what we've done today, at least. And that's the large format photography podcast. And you can slip us enough money for a cup of coffee, which would be really nice of you if you did.
Or Lemsip.
Oh, Lemsip in your case, which is probably more expensive. But we've had 3 donations since the last time, and they are from Kate Miller Wilson, who, funnily enough, I've been having a little chat outside of all of this, and she's an excellent large format photographer. So thank you, Kate. Another donation from James Thorpe. Thank you, James. And we've got one from Christopher J. May, and he's also given us a little note on this one saying, "Yikes, I haven't listened or contributed for several fortnights. My apologies, gentlemen. A cross-country move, new job, and wedding all demanded my attention for these past few months. Working on catching up on the LFPP now, though. So yeah, you're forgiven, Christopher. I'm glad you're catching up on what we've done. I think there's some great episodes that I'm sure you're going to listen to by the time you get to hear this message. So so thank you, Christopher. Andrew, have you got any shout outs this week?
Well, only really, as I shouted out about Heather, Olklaus, Oelklaus, during the show. Just if you're not familiar with Heather's work, check her out, because there's a great little YouTube video, and you can look at some of her work that she makes.
Excellent. And Brendan, have you got any shout outs?
Well, definitely the two wet plate photographers I mentioned earlier. Stephen Rath, you can find him on Instagram. It's s.r.a.f.f. So it's S Rath with dots in between. He's an ex-student of mine, actually. That's really good wet plate photographer. And also Nikki Thompson's the other wet plate collodion.
Was that Nikki? No.
Yeah, Nikki, Nicky Thompson, Thomp Son collodion, Nikki Thompson collodion, and we used to work together. She's based up on Dartmoor, where I live. And also, actually, there's one other person. There's this young French guy, his name's Theobald Piel, and his Instagram is Bruslin_lab. So it's BRUZKLYN_LABZ. And he's built a camera out of a kind of old tuk-tuk, like this little kind of Vespery thing. Oh, yeah. And put a lens in the back, and he's using. I gave him a bit of some tips early on. He's using really similar process to one of the ones I use, and of course other people use it as well in the caravan. But the pictures he's been taking. He's been driving around France, and he's built it beautifully. It's all kind of like wooden boards and these leather bellows, but some of the pictures he's been taking, just weird and wonderful people he's been meeting on the road, circus performers and crazy people, are brilliant. Yes, you should check him out.
Excellent. My shout outs are, as usual, the 6 Times Darkroom. Just get in touch with me by the various means that you might be able to get in touch with me, by Instagram, Twitter, and things like that, and we'll give you some more details at the end. But I'm going to give we've mentioned them already, but I think they deserve their own proper shout-out, and that's Ethan Moses, Nick Lyle, and Graham Young of the Homemade Camera Podcast. This show's right down their street, and it'll be great, actually, guys. And I'm talking to you, Nick and Co. If you can finally find a way to actually do guests on your show, because we've really scratched the surface with Brendan today, and if ever there was some people that needed to have a conversation with you, Brendan, it's those guys.
Who's that? Sorry, that's
the Homemade Camera Podcast.
Oh, is that with them? Is it Graham?
Yes. Graham.
Yeah, I think. I'm chatting to those guys soon, I think.
Oh, excellent. Oh, that's great news. That's great news, because as I say, it's totally. The synergy there is just fantastic. So I'll look forward to listening to that show anyway. So that's good news that you're in contact there. Okay, so that's it for my shout outs. Brendan, how can people? We have touched upon the places where you're out there on social media, but I think it's a good time to go back over those things again in one place. So how can people keep up with you, or possibly even get in touch with you, that kind of stuff?
Instagram, obviously, I use quite a bit. That's where it's a bit more up to date, I think. That's Brendan Barry Photo, and it's Brendan BRENDAN. And then my website, there's a link to it on there, brendanbarry.co.uk. And then the Positive Light Projects, Instagram is Positive Light Projects, and there's a website for that as well. That's the best ways, I reckon.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for being with us. It's been great to have you on the show.
Yeah, it has. Thank you, Brendan.
No, it's been my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Great stuff. And Andrew, how can people keep up with you when you're not on this show?
They can find me on Twitter as Warboy Snapper. They can find me on Facebook group, our Facebook group, the Large Format Photography Podcast Facebook group. Instagram, Warboy Snapper. and once every couple of weeks on the Lensless podcast as well.
Yeah, that's true. We used to be weekly on there, so you've gone to every...
We've gone to weekly at the moment. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. We might go back to weekly, but it gives us a bit more breathing space, to be honest.
Yeah.
And Corey's pretty busy, he works, he's out all day long. He's got a young family and, he finds it quite hard, I think. We're very limited on the times we can record and it got a bit stressful. So we didn't want to fall out of love with it. So we'd rather do it 2 weeks than, do it weekly and have to feel like a chore.
Yeah, I totally understand that.
And we are up to episode 76 or something now. So, yeah, it's been cracking on a bit.
Yeah. Okay, if people want to get in touch, I did this to you on the last podcast, so I'm going to do it again. So if people want to get in touch with us via email, what's the best way of doing that?
The large format photography podcast at Yahoo?
No. You were doing so well.
The large format photography podcast at Gmail?
Yes, that's the one.
.com?
That's the one.
There we go.
There you go. I have mentioned it for the
third time
17 episodes that we've been on, but
I don't listen though, do I? You know that. Like my wife talked to me, I don't listen to her.
It is one of those things that.
Can I just share a funny story? Sorry, go on. You finish off first.
Okay. I was just going to say that we on the Classic Lenses podcast we formed our own distinct Facebook group probably about 6 months ago now, and there are still people. When I mentioned, we put it into the podcast group, and it goes, "You've got a podcast group?" yeah. Well, we've been saying it for the last 6 months, so nobody listens to these things anyway. I think they've all switched off by now, but they're going to miss your funny story now probably. But go ahead with it.
No, they're not. So I was in Liverpool yesterday. What day is today? Whatever day it is today, Monday evening. I went to see my daughter who lives in Liverpool, and she lives above the Open Eye Gallery. And they've got this festival of light in Liverpool, and you can watch the little art installations and sound and music. It's really good. And I did try some nighttime photography. But as we were wandering around, I said to Georgia, did you listen to, because I sent her the link to Alice Tomlinson's show that we did, I said, did you listen to that? She said, yeah. And I did, Dad, and I'd really like that book for Christmas. Thank you very much. I said, oh, goodness me. Did I say that out loud? Or I thought we said it after we stopped recording. She says, no. She says you mentioned it during the show.
Excellent.
So I have actually got the book for Christmas, and she knows now. So, but it's okay.
That's good. Well, okay, just rounding up for me. If people want to hear more, actually, I haven't mentioned we're on YouTube as well, or at least you can listen. You can see a picture that doesn't move and listen to our words on YouTube, but you can actually get subtitles as well if that might help you, or not. Looking at the standard of the subtitling that happens on there, so that's on YouTube. We've got a channel which is the Large Format Photography Podcast. Is the name of that channel, surprisingly enough, and that's it. So I'm on Twitter as Simon4. I'm on Instagram as Simon Forster Photographic. I do a podcast every week called the Classic Lenses Podcast that goes out on a Monday, and that's pretty much it. So there's usually something I've forgotten, but hopefully I'll remember it next time. So we're going to be back in 2 weeks' time. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.